All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is July 13th, 2025, about 3 p.m. where I am right now. And this is part 5 of our 13th book in our Book to React series, Black Bolshevik, Autobiography of an Afro-American Communist, written by Haywood. This is a book that we've been reading over the past week and a half or so. I took a few days off. I've been working this new job I have. Plus, I'm also an English teacher, as all of you know. So I'm very, very busy. Constantly busy before I can actually come on live stream. Coming on live, doing my YouTube channel, this is just a side project, my passion project, where I get to speak my truth and talk directly to the people and share what I'm interested in. And also share my life as well as documentation that I existed. But yeah, this is a very lovely book that we've been reading. We're at the end of chapter 3. We're going to be picking up on page 108. And I want to give a shout out to everybody who's been supporting this content, watching the previous book to reacts. Go watch some of the other books we've read, like Is the Turk a White Man, Black Fatigue, White Women, Black Men, Illicit Sex in the 19th Century South. So many great and interesting books we've read on this channel that I think are funny, enlightening, disheartening, engaging. Just so much is in between the pages of these books, and that's what I try to motivate people to do by picking up books, reading them for themselves, because a lot of the times in this world we're, pushed to work 24 hours a day. They don't want us educating ourselves, and I think it's important that we keep literacy alive. We keep text alive. We keep these books alive. And speaking of which, you can get this book for free because this is a communist book, and Haywood was a diehard communist. You can get it at libcom.org for free just by clicking that attachment right here. Or if you are a capitalist pig who wants to have a very cool collector's item to put on your bookshelf, you can pick up the hardcover for about $650 US. Maybe even more. Maybe that's 675 because Trump is dropping the US dollar. Unfortunately, I know this very too well, living abroad here. Anyway, you could also get it on paperback for about $50 or so, and you can get it on Amazon right here. But this is a very dope book by a very dope man who lived well over a century ago, died in 1985. I feel like I am Haywood reincarnated because in the previous chapters, he got married, then divorced very quickly. He worked some shitty jobs in his mid-20s, just like me. He came to an understanding of the world through influences from others and also just his lived experience as well, just like me. And I know that's very general. A lot of people can relate to that, but I really feel a connection with this brother, and it's something I haven't felt before with any other book. And I've read, Malcolm X's autobiography. I've skimmed through pages of Frederick Douglass's autobiography, but Haywood's book is touching me in a very, very special way, and I'm very glad that, we're reading this book together. So shout out to everybody who's going to tune in. We're going to wrap up chapter 3 right here where we left off. He was talking about his impressions of Marcus Garvey's movement and what he is writing about it. And we're going to wrap up chapter 3. Then I'll catch y'all possibly tomorrow. And I promise, I'm going to try to come live more often. I've just come home so tired from work that it's hard for me to turn on the live. But let's continue here. So there is no doubt that Garvey was voicing the sentiments of the vast mass of new migrant workers. And it was not that we had any compunction about strike breaking in industries from which blacks were barred. In fact, that had been one of the ways blacks broke into industries such as stockyards and steel. We were also keenly aware of the Jim Crow policies of the existing trade union leadership and of the anti-black prejudices rampant among white workers. But in casting blacks permanently into the role of strike breakers, Garvey was hoping to further divide an already polarized situation and playing into the hands of businessmen, bankers, factory owners, and the reactionary leadership of the trade unions. My own experience with unions in the waiters trade was bad. Old waiters would tell us how in the first part of the century they had listened to the siren call of white union leaders. They had gone out on strike ostensibly to better their conditions, only to find their jobs immediately taken by whites. This had been quite a serious blow because at that time, black waiters had had jobs in most of the best hotels and in a number of fine restaurants. It is therefore understandable that in 1920, we black waiters felt not the slightest pang of conscience in taking over the jobs of white waiters on strike at the Marigold Gardens, the old Bismarck Gardens on the north side, one of the swankiest night spots in Chicago. It was also probably the best waiter's job in town. In fact, so good that some of the German captains who remained on the job used to drive to and from work in Cadillacs. The strike was broken after several months and blacks were turned out. Strike breaking, to me, was not a philosophy or principle, as Garvey contended, but an expedient forced upon blacks by the Jim Crow policies of the bosses and the unions. I love how he's framing this here because, once again, this is a political autobiography, so it's written with the intention of influencing you to his political bent, which is radical communism and black nationalism. But similar to Asada's book, which we reviewed earlier this year, he's not just, sucking the dick of the communists. He's not just walking the party line. He's keeping it real, like how he viewed it, right? And he's not just saying, oh, strike breaking is great. This is what all workers need to do. All workers need to join a union. No, as a black person in this world, you're going to have a very different experience in relation to all things. And in this case, the unions at that time were segregated. And the white workers were saying, yeah, we need to unionize, but goddamn those black strike breakers. You get what I'm saying? So very interesting how he's framing this here, and I love how this text is so well written and so clean and straight to the point. Continuing here. Even as Garvey was putting forward such views, times were beginning to change. Large numbers of blacks had been brought into industry during the war and had joined unions, especially in steel and the packing houses. A new industrial unionism was developing and raising the slogan of black and white labor unity. My sister Eppa's experiences in 1919 at Swift Packing Company were a case in point. She was one of the first black women to join the union during the organizing drive of the Stockyards Labor Council, which was headed by two communists, William Z. Foster and Jack Johnstone. That's so crazy because I got in contact with my party leader or club leader of the CPUSA in New Orleans, and he recommended, Bill Foster's book to me, which I think we should read as a duty to the party. As my duty to the Communist Party of the United States, I need to be reading William C. Foster's book on labor organizing. And it's so crazy, Haywood met William C. Foster. Anyway, the drive was supported by John Fitzpatrick, chairman of the Chicago Federation of Labor, and a bitter foe of the Jim Crow machine of Samuel Gomper's AFL. Despite inevitable racial tensions fostered by the employers, EPA had seen the basic unity of interest between all workers and felt strongly that the union was the best place to fight for the interests of black workers. In looking back at our study of the Garvey movement, it must be evaluated in light of the fact that it was our first confrontation with nationalism as a mass movement. Our mistake, which I was to find out later through my own experience and study of nationalist movements, resulted from the failure to understand the contradictory nature of the nationalism of oppressed peoples. This contradiction or dualism was inherent in the interclass character of these movements once they assume a popular mass form. They comprise various classes and social groupings with conflicting interests, tendencies, and motives, all gathered under the unifying banner of national liberation, each with its own concept of that goal and how it should be attained. These conflicts at first surface as the movement develops. They are expressed in two main currents, tendencies within the movement. First of all, there is a nationalism which reflects the interests of the basic masses, workers and peasants, determined to fight for liberation against the oppressor of the nation. Then there is the nationalism of the black bourgeoisie, who, while at time in conflict with the white oppressors, tend toward compromise and accommodation to protect their own weak position. From the very beginning, this dualism was reflected in the Garvey movement. A highly vocal and aggressively dominant current within the movement was the drive of the small business professional and intellectual elements for a black-controlled economy. They sought fulfillment of this goal through withdrawal to Africa, where they envisioned establishment of their own state, their right to exploit their own masses free from the overwhelming competition of dominant white capital. A historical example of this can be seen in Liberia. They thought they could accomplish this presumably within the acquiescence of the American white ruler and even the active support of some. Very, very interesting take here. Very, very interesting take. So basically what he's saying is that, a lot of the black bourgeoisie, the black business owners, the small secondhand car dealerships, they were like, yeah, we support Garvey because we should have a nation where we can hire all black workers, pay them livable wages, right? Oppress their buying power and fight their unions and stuff like that. We don't want to have to compete with the white folks who got all the money and they can then pay black folks just a little bit more and stuff like that. Like, it's a very interesting take right here. Basically, black nationalism in Harry Haywood's analysis is a movement of black capital owners, the owners of the means of production in the black social class, who basically want to oppress other black people, right? And this has been my critique of the whole earn your leisure type of liberation that is prevalent among black folks right now. Basically, that we all need to be LLC owners. We all need to get trades. We all need to start opening small businesses. That's the interesting take that he's giving right here, which I find very compelling. Continuing here. On the other hand, there was a grassroots nationalism of the masses, the uprooted, dispossessed soil tillers of the South, their poverty-ridden counterparts in the slum ghettos of the cities. These masses saw in the black nationalist state fulfillment of their age-old yearnings for land, equality, and freedom through power in their own hands to guarantee and protect these freedoms. It was this indigenous, potentially revolutionary nationalism that Garvey diverted with his Back to Africa slogan. We failed to recognize the objective conflict of interest between these class components of the movement, equating the social and political aims of the ghetto nationalists, the bourgeoisie, to that of the masses, condemning the whole as reactionary, escapist, and utopian. Very, very interesting. So he's saying, on the other hand, the other supporters of Garvey were basically trying to fight back against the rampant racism and white supremacy, and basically they just wanted freedom, justice, and equality. So there was a small group of black bourgeoisie who were supporting Garvey that basically said, we want factories in Africa where we can pay people to work 13 hours a day for $2, right? And then there's a mass amount of black people who say, we just want to support Garvey because he's talking about freedom, liberation, equality, housing, bread, clothing, etc. You get what I'm saying? So very interesting. And he's saying, Harry Haywood is saying here, like, I feel bad that we disrespected the masses of black folks that were rallying around Garvey. Very interesting take here. Love it, love it, love it. All right, continuing here. So these were the internal contradictions upon which the movement was to flounder and finally collapse. They were brought to a head by the subsiding of the post-war economic depression, the ushering in of the boom and subsequent easing of the plight of the blacks, the partial adjustment of migrants to their new environment, and their partial absorption into industry. The main contradiction inherent in the Garvey movement from its very beginning had been the conflict between the needs of the masses to defend and advance their rights in the USA and the fantastic Back to Africa schemes of the Garvey leadership. Garvey's emphasis on these fantastic schemes reflected his resolution of the conflict in favor of business interests and against the interests of the masses. The resources and energy of the organization were increasingly diverted to support racial business enterprises such as the Black Star Line and the Negro Factories Corporation. The concentration on selling stock for the Black Star Steamship Line by the UNIA leadership from 1921 on neglected the immediate needs of the masses and began to erode the base of support. So basically what he's trying to say here is that, Garvey and them were basically focused on capitalism. Hey, how can we open up a factory? How can we sell stock on our company on Wall Street, right? Instead of, focusing on what the masses of people want, which makes it very similar to MAGA. MAGA is all about, America for Americans, jobs for Americans, and stuff like that. So then Trump and all of his say, oh, it's the immigrants, right? As soon as we kick out the immigrants, everything's going to get better for you. But it's not about lifting the minimum wage. It's not about guaranteeing jobs. It's not about guaranteeing housing and things like that. So, a lot of ways, Garvey's movement in Harry Haywood's analysis is very similar to MAGA in it's targeting people's economic concerns and also social concerns for freedom, justice, equality, and more liberation, right? And just saying, hey, we're going to sell stock on the stock market. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, continuing here. So, Furthermore, Garvey's response to the crisis in the movement exposed the dangerously reactionary logic of a program based upon complete separation of the races and its acceptance of the white racist doctrine of natural racial incompatibility. Pursuing the logic of this idea against the backdrop of the organization's decline inevitably drove Garvey into an alliance of expediency with the most rabid segregationists and race bigots of the period. So yeah, basically by saying, hey, back to Africa we go, and Africa for Africans, and we need to separate, you're basically, conceding to the white supremacists, like, yeah, black people can't get along with white people and vice versa, which is not true. We are a human species. We're not in a competition of the races. There's none of that actually exists in nature. This is all socially created. Thus, in 1922, Garvey sought the support of Edward Young Clark, the imperial giant of the KKK. This meeting of the minds between Garvey and the Klan was not fortuitous. It was an open secret that it took place on the basis of Garvey's agreement to soft-pedal the struggle for equality in the U.S. in return for help in the settlement of blacks in Africa. This ideological kinship arose from the mutual acceptance of the racist dogma of natural incompatibility of races, race purity, and so forth. In 1924, Garvey went so far seeking support for his Back to Africa program as to invite John Powell, organizer of the Anglo-Saxon clubs, and other prominent racists to speak at UNIA headquarters. Garvey also publicly praised the KKK. According to W.B. Du Bois, the Klan issued circulars defending Garvey and declared that the opposition to him was from the Catholic Church. In the late 30s, Senator Bilbo of Mississippi introduced a bill to deport 13 million blacks to Africa and received the support of the remnants of the Garvey organization. So once again, similar to MAGA, we have Black MAGA as well, who also say, well, if you don't like America, leave. And they're all for the deportations and also for the expulsion of some black people, right? I wouldn't be surprised if some Black MAGA were to say, yeah, let's send some black thugs to Sikot in El Salvador. Continuing here. The final curtain was to drop on the Garvey episode with the failure of the Black Star Line. The movement was torn by factionalism and splits, with some of the leadership and remaining rank and file demanding that the domestic fight for equal rights be emphasized over the Back to Africa scheme of Garvey. The internal struggle drove many out of the organization and others into a multitude of splinter groups, each a variation of Garveyism itself. Taking advantage of this disarray, the government moved in. In 1925, Garvey was framed on the charges of using the mail to defraud in connection with the sale of stocks for the Black Star Line and was sent to the Atlanta Federal Prison for 2 years. He was deported to the West Indies upon release from prison. This debacle marked the end of Garveyism as an important mass movement, although the offshoots continued to exist in numbers of smaller groups advocating Garvey's theory. At the time, I had taken Garvey's peculiar brand as representing nationalism in general and had simply rejected the whole ideology as a foreign import with no roots in the conditions of U.S. blacks. Seeing only the negative features of nationalism in the UNIA, I was blind to the progressive and potentially revolutionary aspects which were to prove so important in my own later development. Thus, the great movement that Garvey built passed into history, but nationalism as a mass trend persisted in the black freedom struggle. Existing side by side with the assimilationist trend, it was eclipsed by the latter in so-called normal times, while flaring up in times of stress and crisis. The Garvey movement was the U.S. counterpart of the vast upsurge of national and colonial liberation struggles which swept the world during the war and post-war period. In this period, masses of blacks had come to consider themselves as an oppressed nation. Garvey's ability to capture leadership of this nationalist upsurge by default was the result of the immaturity of the revolutionary forces, black and white. The collapse of the Garvey movement proved conclusively that the petty bourgeoisie ghetto nationalist current, left to itself, led only to a hopeless blind alley. Unfortunately, the forces which could give black nationalism revolutionary content and direction were only in the process of formation. The black working class and its spokesman had not yet arrived on the scene as an independent force in the black community, and therefore was not capable of challenging either the assimilationist leadership of the NAACP or the ghetto nationalism of Garvey. Its counterpart among radical, class-conscious white labor were waging an uphill fight against the Jim Crow-minded AFL bureaucracy led by the Gompers machine. These radical sections of white labor were not yet clear as to the significance of the black freedom struggle as a revolutionary force in its own right, and regarded it simply as a part of the general labor question. Coalescence of these two forces was then a decade away, destined not to take place until the crisis of the 30s. The preceding analysis is hindsight. I didn't realize the significance of Garvey's movement until a few years later when, as a student in Moscow, I was assigned to a commission to prepare a resolution on the Negro question in the USA for the 6th Congress of the Communist International in 1928. It was in the course of these discussions that I came to the recognition of nationalism as an authentic and potentially revolutionary trend in the movement. The assimilationist programs of the NAACP have been easy to reject. Garvey was somewhat more difficult. But while the Garvey movement was forcing me to a consideration of nationalism, which at the time I also rejected, I could not help but notice the other political developments of the period. Most conspicuous was the concerted and vicious attack being carried out against white radicals and the trade union movement. The same forces appeared to be behind the Palmer raids of 1919 and 1920, behind the wave of racism, and behind the violent union and strike busting which took place. The foreigners who were being deported, the radicals who were being imprisoned, and the workers throughout the country who were being attacked by the Pinkerton private armies were white as well as black. In Chicago, the strikes at the stockyards and the steel mills in the area particularly attracted my attention. For me, the Garvey movement, the racist assault, and the attack on labor and the radical movement sharpened my political perceptions. The racial fog lifted and the face of the location of the enemy was clearly outlined. I began to see that the main beneficiaries of black subjugation also profited from the social oppression of poor whites, native and foreign-born, as they still do today. Poor whites, you need to wake up. You need to wake up. Anyway. The enemy was those who controlled and manipulated the levers of power. They were the super rich, white-moneyed interests who owned the nation's factories and banks and thus controlled its wealth. They were known by many names: the corporate elites, the industrial, financial, robber barons, etc. Chicago was the home base of a significant segment of this ruling class. Here, the chain of command was clear. On the political side, it extended from City Hall down to the lowliest ward healer and precinct captain, and was tied in at all levels with organized crime. On the economic side, it was represented by such employer organizations as the Chicago Chamber of Commerce, by trade associations, and by top management in the giant industrial plants, railroads, big commercial establishments, banks, utilities, and insurance firms. Their chain of command extended down to the foremen and department heads and on-the-job supervisors. These levers of power also controlled education, the media, the arts, and all law enforcement agencies, both military and police. At the bottom of this pyramid and bearing its weight were the working people who toiled in the steel mills, the packing plants, the railway yards, and the thousands of other sweatshops. Lowliest among these were the blacks, pushed to the very bottom of the divide and rule policy by the corporate giants and their henchmen, and the complementary Jim Crow policies and practices of the AFL trade union bureaucracy. All right, and that's the end of the section on Garvey. We're going to read here now passages which I believe builds on what he was just talking about, how he came to realize, that the fight for equality and justice will have to include a takedown of capitalism. And here he's starting to become aware of the capitalist interests that oppress our people. So, our postal discussion circle, by the way, he was working at the post office at the time when he's thinking about all of this. Our postal discussion circle, which had held together scarcely 3 months, was breaking up. Heath, our chairman and recognized leader, was leaving. He had played the greatest role in keeping the group together. Now he had taken a job at some college in Virginia, his native state. Differences had already developed in the group, and with Heath gone, the possibilities for reconciling them seemed slim. These differences, as I recall, were not of a political or ideological nature. They were seldom expressed in the open, but were reflected in the opposition of some members to proposals for enlarging the group and moving it into the outside political arena. This opposition evidently reflected the desire of some members to retain the group as a narrow discussion circle with members restricted by tacit understanding to those whom they considered their intellectual peers. It seemed to me they sought to reduce it to a sort of elitist mutual admiration society. As a result of this sectarian attitude, the group hardly grew beyond its original membership of a dozen or so. So basically, him and his bros are like, all right, guys, so, the group is a bit fraying. One of the smart guys leaves. Okay, are we going to become like a political party, a vanguard party, or are we just going to become a circle jerk session? And it seems like Harry Haywood was like, we need to be more politically active and not just sit at the kitchen table and rant all day. Anyway, there was no doubt, though, that our association had been mutually beneficial. All of us had grown in political understanding and awareness. But up to the time of Heath's departure, we had advanced no program for putting our newly acquired political understanding into practice. Our original plans for the organization of a forum to debate the issues of the day never got off the ground. We had not developed a program for involvement in the struggles of the community, nor, for that matter, in the immediate on-the-job problems of black postal employees. We never even got around to deciding on a name for the group. One suggestion that we call ourselves the New Negro Forum was never acted upon. Shout out to Elaine Locke. Shout out to Elaine Locke. Shout out to Elaine Locke. Heath, Mabley, Doc, and myself were beginning to feel the pull from the outside, the need for a broader political arena of activity to play a more active role in the community. We were the ones who most often attended radical forums and lectures and kept abreast of what was going on in the South Side community. We often went to the Bugs Club in Washington Park, Chicago's equivalent of London's Hyde Park, and the Dill Pickle Club on the North Side, which was ran by the anarchist Jack Jones. Heath had gone. Mabley refused the chairmanship, pleading that he was tied down by his family and could not take on additional responsibilities. Doc refused to accept the honor. He was similarly tied down by his job in dental practice. But the real reason for their refusal, which they were to confide to me later, was that they had lost confidence in the group. Without Heath, they saw no future role for it. Like myself, they were attracted to the broader movement. I also declined giving as my excuse that I was quitting the post office in a few days and was going back to my old job on the railroad. A chairman pro tem was chosen. I don't remember who. I continued my reading along the lines which Otto had suggested. Among the books I read was Henry Morgan's Ancient Society, which Engels had used as the basis for the origins of family, Gustavus Meyer's History of the Great American Fortunes, John Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World, and Jack London's The Iron Heel. I also kept abreast of world events, reading about Lenin and Trotsky in revolutionary Russia. I followed the post-war colonial rebellion of Sun Yat-sen's China, Gandhi in India, Ataturk in Turkey. Shout out to Ataturk. I know that will make Akti happy, but I know she's not listening. The rebellion of the Rif tribes in Morocco, led by Abdul Krim. There were rumblings in Black Africa, strikes and demonstrations against colonial oppression. One heard such names as Kadeli and Gumedi of the South African National Congress and of Sandino in Nicaragua, who fought the U.S. Marines for many years. My feet were getting itchy. I was fed up with the post office and the excruciatingly monotonous nature of the work. At the same time, the night shift cramped my social life as well as my growing need for broader political activity. I quit the job without regret. Soon after, I started work as a waiter on the Santa Fe's Chief, the company's crack train running to Los Angeles. It was an 8-day run, 3 days to the coast with a 2-day layover in Los Angeles, and 3 days back. Our crew would make 3 trips a month and a layover 1 trip, 8 days in Chicago. This schedule gave me approximately 12 free days a month in Chicago, time enough for both political and social life. It was a hard job, but good money for those days, and exciting after the drab routine of the post office. I wish we built railroads all across America now, because it still sounds like a cool job. You know, being a flight attendant sounds kind of shitty, low key. Like being a flight attendant, like you're cramped up in the airplane. You know, there's not a lot of space. Sure, you get to travel the world and like spend 3 days in Paris or whatever. But traveling, zigzagging across America, looking at the landscapes from the ground view, you know, seeing the mountains of the, you know, in the Pacific Northwest, or you know, the expanse of the Great Plains. I don't know, the Mojave Desert, whatever. Like that sounds cool. That sounds cool as hell. I wish they brought those jobs back. I wish America built infrastructure. America should have like the most metro systems in the world, the most tram systems in the world, the best public transport in the world, and also trains that zigzag across the country. Maybe in my children's lifetime they'll see that. Who knows? Either way, till then we have Europe. Continuing here. So Los Angeles, Sweet Los, as we used to call it. The Santa Fe boys, all big spenders, were very popular with the girls. A bevy would show up to meet us at the station every trip. I was to remain on the run 3 years, which up to that time was the longest I had ever remained on one job. Upon my return from the first trip, I called Mabley, and he informed me that he thought the discussion circle had dissolved. Only 1 or 2 guys showed up at the next scheduled meeting, and the pro tem chairman himself was absent. It was dead. My political development continued nevertheless. The runs on the Santa Fe gave ample time for discussion with my fellow crew members. Most of them, though somewhat older, were as aware as those at the post office with whom I had worked. I also continued to read, now studying the Communist Manifesto, Engels' Origins of the Family, Private Property in the State, and Marx's Value, Price, and Profit. Let this be a lesson to everybody out there. There's never an excuse not to be reading. Come on now. Our ancestors were working like 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, and they still found time to consume text, right? Let's not get caught up in the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Instagrams. Pick up a book, which is why we are reading, That's an important thing, man. I'm trying to encourage young folks, everybody, to read. Go to your local library, check out a book, download books. If you want a way to get books for free, holla at me, and this is one book you should get for free. We're continuing here. So, the first stage of my political search was near an end. In the years since I had mustered out of the Army, I had come from being a disgruntled black ex-soldier to being a self-conscious revolutionary looking for an organization with which to make revolution. For 3 years, I had listened in lecture halls, at rallies, and in Washington Park to a spate of orators, each claiming to meet the challenge of the times. They included the great people's lawyer, Clarence Darrow, Judge Fisher of the Reform Movement, the socialist leader, Victor Berger, and sundry other members of his party, the anarchist Ben Reichman, Ben Fletcher, the black IWW orator and organizer, and assorted Garveyites. Although some had their points, for example, the fighting spirit and sincerity of the IWW impressed me, I rejected them all. In the spring of 1922, I approached my brother Otto, whom I knew had joined the Workers' or Communist Party shortly after its inception in 1921. I told him that I wanted to join the party. I knew it. I knew his brother Otto was going to be the one to lead him to socialism. I knew it. The fact that Otto was in the party and had advised me from time to time on my reading had undoubtedly influenced my decision. I had a generally favorable impression of the black communists I knew, men like Otto, the Owens brothers, and Edward Doty. I was also impressed by whites like Jim Early, Sam Hammersmark, Robert Minor, and his wife Lydia Gibson. What added great weight to my favorable impression of the communists, however, was their political identity with the successful Bolshevik Revolution. At the time it happened, I had been taken totally unaware of its significance. I first heard of it during an incident that occurred in France in August 1918. My regiment, while marching into positions on the Soissons sector, had pushed for arrest. On one side of the road, there was a high barbed wire fence, and behind it loitered groups of soldiers in strange uniforms. Upon closer observation, it became clear that they were prisoners. They spoke in a strange tongue, but we understood from their gestures that they were asking for cigarettes. A number of us immediately responded, offering them some from our packs. When we asked who they were, one of them replied in halting English that they were Russian Cossacks. He explained that their division, which had been fighting on the Western Front, had been withdrawn from the lines, disarmed, and placed in quarantine. They were considered unreliable, he said, because of the revolution in Russia. At the time, I was not even sure of the meaning of the word revolution. Some kind of civil disorder, I conjectured. Giving the matter no further thought, we resumed our march. It was not until I had returned from France that I began reading about the Russian Revolution. From then on, I followed its course, and despite the distorted view in the U.S. press, its significance slowly dawned on me. Here, I felt, was a tangible accomplishment and real power. Along with other black radicals, I was impressed, just as a later generation came to look at China, Cuba, and Vietnam as models of successful struggle against tyranny, colonialism, and oppression. Thus, I was particularly attracted to the communists. Sure, the party was largely white in its racial composition, with only a handful of black members. I felt, nevertheless, that it comprised the best and most sincerely revolutionary and internationally minded elements among white radicals, and therefore formed the basis for the revolutionary unity of blacks and whites. This was so, I believed, because it was a part of a world revolutionary movement uniting Chinese, Africans, and Latin Americans with Europeans and North Americans through the Third Communist International. The Bolsheviks had destroyed the Tsarist rule, established the first workers' state, and breached the world system of capitalism over a territory comprising more than 1/6 of the world's surface. Most impressive as far as blacks were concerned was that the revolutionaries had laid the basis for solving the national and racial questions on the basis of complete freedom for the numerous nations, colonial peoples, and minorities formerly impressed by the Tsarist Empire. Moscow had now become the focus of the colonial revolution. In the turbulence of those days, there seemed every reason to think that the energy unleashed in Russia would carry the revolution throughout the world. In the U.S., the deluge of lies and distortions by the media, the red baiting, the Palmer raids had not been able to hide this monumental achievement of the Russian Bolsheviks. The uninformed black man in the street could reason that a phenomenon that evoked such fear and hatred on the part of the white supremacist rulers couldn't be all that bad. As for me, the socialist victory confirmed my belief in the Bolshevik variety of socialism as a way out for U.S. blacks. I found the theory behind the achievement all there in Lenin's State and Revolution. He developed and applied the theories of Marx and Engels on the role of the state and the dictatorship of the proletariat. This work was the single most important book I had read in the entire 3 years of my political search and was decisive in leading me to the Communist Party. I wonder how other people on the train, when he's like reading books in between, shifts, like, they're looking at his book and it says like Lenin, the State and Revolution, Marx, Capital. Like, I wonder how other people reacted to that, because that's pretty bold. Like, it's still a bit, dicey reading openly Marx like in public in America. You know what I mean? Anyway, in this work, Lenin clarified the nature of the state and the means by which to overthrow it. His approach seemed practical and realistic. It was no longer just abstract theory. Using origins of the family as a departure point, Lenin demystified and desanctified the myth of the state in capitalist society as an impartial monitor of human affairs. Rather, he exposed the state in capitalist society and its apparatus of military, police, courts, and prisons as an instrument of ruling class domination, a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It thus followed that the job of forcibly replacing the state power of the dominant class with that of the proletariat was the paramount and indispensable task of socialist revolution. As far as I could see, the Soviet example appeared to offer a completely clear solution to the problems facing American workers, both black and white. I saw the elimination of racism and the achievement of complete equality for blacks as an inevitable byproduct of a socialist revolution in the United States. It was at this point that I became fully resolved to make my own personal commitment to the fight for a socialist United States. The first part of my odyssey was over. Well written. Love this book, man. I'm loving this book. And this now leads us to chapter 4, an organization of revolutionaries, most likely where he's going to talk about joining the CPUSA and his time there. Very interested to read that. So glad that we're in chapter 4. We're going to pick up on this. This is page 121. Yeah, we're going to pick up on page 121 when we read later. This is going to be a short live stream. because I'm cutting it. I got to go back to work. I also got some other paperwork I need to do for English teaching. But I want to give a shout out to everybody who's going to watch this in the playback and who is also enjoying this book. And let me know if you have any other books you think we should read. I did put up a poll in the tab. We did have quite a lot of viewers. I'm looking down on my phone. I see that we had 9 or 10, at most like 11 viewers at one time. You know what I mean? At the channel, which is good. But y'all should jump in the comments. Y'all should say something. If you see something, say something. You know what I mean? But let me quickly see what the poll has to say, because I'm going to shut the poll down, and then we're going to wrap up this live stream. Because the question was about, should the government provide free health care? Oh, wait, let me turn on the Wi-Fi on this other computer right here. I don't see the poll in my phone right here. That's the thing. So let me open this up. Hold up. How do I manage? Let me go to this live stream here. Okay, let me make sure it's off. All right. We'd like to know, for the 11 people that showed up, how they voted in the poll, if it's possible. Come on. All right, it might not be possible. I might have to just shut it down. Hold on. Okay. Here we go. I'm going to end this poll. So the results that we have on the poll. All right, only one vote. 11 people watched, but only one vote. That's sad. Should the government guarantee free healthcare to a citizen? At least it's one vote for yes, and that makes me happy enough. Either way, y'all be easy out there, and peace.